Há 60 anos, o som na forma da voz humana chegava ao cinema. E com ele nascia uma nova indústria, ou melhor, renascia. Há muito tempo, os filmes mudos eram um bom negócio, e no início da década de 20, artistas como Chaplin e Mary Pickford ganhavam $1 milhão por ano. Mas o som trazia uma nova e revolucionária dimensão que não teve uma aceitação universal imediata. Os puristas diziam que o som seria a ruína da arte do cinema. Mas, com o correr dos anos, uma diferente forma de arte começou a emergir. O centro dessa nova arte foi Hollywood, descrito por John Huston como uma jaula destinada a capturar os nossos sonhos. Uma visão mais romântica que a de Chandler, que descreveu Los Angeles como uma cidade com a personalidade de um copinho descartável. Nestes e nos programas seguintes, vamos ver o que aconteceu com essa jaula dourada a partir da Revolução de 27. Esta é a história do cinema falado. Ou, se preferirem, uma celebração da Era do Som.
Raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling. I wanna be loved by you, just you, nobody else but you. I wanna be loved by you alone.
Play it once then, for all time's sake.
I don't know what you mean, Miss Elsa.
Play it, Sam. Play as time goes by.
You're a woman sending a soldier to his death with a beautiful memory. Scarlett, kiss me. Kiss me once.
Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you. You ain't heard
Em outubro de 27, Al Jolson pôde ser ouvido em O Cantor de Jazz. Era o início oficial do cinema falado. Mas esta não foi a primeira tentativa de se dar voz ao cinema. O inventivo Thomas Edison já fazia experiências com som em 1894 e em 1913. Filmes falados já eram exibidos comercialmente nos cinemas da época. Por exemplo, um curta-metragem recém-descoberto, A Piada de Jack, em que Jack faz uma introdução elaborada para a sua piada.
Elaborate foundations for his little jest.
You know, he's a stranger in New York, poor fellow. He came here to have his ears operated on. And I thought you might entertain him while I keep a short business appointment.
But Jack's here, I'm all alone, and I just...
No difference, Dolly. Ned is a fine fellow, and I'll vouch for him.
Se um incêndio não tivesse destruído o laboratório de Edison e encerrado suas experiências em 1914, os filmes falados poderiam ter sido lançados mais de uma década antes. Nos anos intermediários ocorreram experiências tanto com som em disco quanto em filme. É quando entra em cena a Warner Brothers Pictures, uma empresa pequena que produzia filmes mudos em Hollywood. Os irmãos Warner desafiaram os grandes estúdios ao comprar a patente de um aparelho chamado Vitaphone, um sistema de gravação em disco. Em agosto de 26, lançaram uma novidade em Nova York, num programa duplo em que a primeira parte mostrava um concerto. A segunda parte era um filme mudo sobre Dom Juan, estrelado por John Barrymore e Mary Astor, com acréscimo de uma trilha musical e efeitos sonoros sincronizados. Os filmes falados eram considerados mais uma ameaça ao teatro do que aos filmes mudos. Mesmo assim, a novidade causou sensação, como relembra George Sidney. Seu pai era executivo da Metro em Nova York.
On the bureau, don't go to school, go to Warner Brothers Theater and be there at 1 o'clock. That was more important. And I went, and there was a film. The streetcar came down the street, and the bell went clang, clang. That was the only sound in the picture.
In the early days, I played with jazz orchestras, and several very large ones in different places when I was in my teens. And we were called upon twice to make little short subjects with an orchestra playing, that's all. And they would have their regular films, but they'd have only one piece of sound.
O entusiasmo do público pelos curtas da Vitaphone era inegável e no histórico 6 de outubro de 27, a Warner promoveu a premiere do primeiro longa-metragem falado, O Cantor de Jazz, dirigido por Alan Crosland. As filmagens tinham durado 4 meses e o filme era estrelado por Al Jolson. Não era exatamente um filme falado, pois continha apenas 4 segmentos sincronizados. Mesmo assim, a célebre frase de Jolson, "Esperem um instante, vocês ainda não ouviram nada", provavelmente foi mais profética do que ele imaginou.
Listen, I'm going to sing this like I will if I go on the stage, with this skill. I'm going to sing it jazzy. Now get this. Blue sky, smiling at me, me, nothing but little blue sky. Do I see, do, bluebird, singing a song, nothing but little bluebird, all day long. You like that slapping business? Never saw the sun, shining so bright, never saw things going so right. Noticing the days hurrying by, when you're in love, oh, don't they fly? Blue days, all of them gone, nothing but.
A partir deste momento, o filme perde o fôlego e também a fala, e volta a ser um filme mudo convencional com música e legendas. O cantor de jazz foi um enorme sucesso, mas os privilegiados não eram muitos, pois os cinemas equipados com o novo sistema sonoro eram raros. Os grandes estúdios ainda hesitavam por razões comerciais. Havia o alto custo envolvido na reforma dos palcos de filmagem para o som, e isso significava não apenas reequipar os estúdios, mas praticamente reconstruí-los.
With maybe the exception of Warner Brothers that began it, we're all hoping it was a passing fad. I don't think that anybody at the studio, it meant total revolution,
And I know in the case of MGM, my father had the studio at 127th Street in the River, which had been an old Marion Davies studio. Hearst had the studio. And my father started making shorts. And he had everybody from the anybody who could talk or sing or make a noise. That was the whole criteria of hiring you. And he made all these shorts, and they went out, and they made all kinds of money. Still, California resisted.
In a sense, the talking picture was a replacement of something that was very well established. And the producing studios were very well geared to making silent pictures.
A Warner manteve-se confiante anunciando uma série de 12 filmes falados e, para se garantir, 16 filmes mudos. Um desses filmes falados, Tenderloin, deveria ter alguns interlúdios sonoros, mas não muitos, senão o Vitafone deixaria de ser uma novidade. Havia dúvidas em relação ao nível de som aceitável pelo público.
At first they said, it'll hurt the ears. We can't have that much sound. The one real short subject was someone singing or a little music, that's enough. We cannot stand people talking that much. The same as when color came in. They said we can only have 10 minutes of it at a time. The same way as early days, my mother and father had a little theater, and they played 1 reel pictures, and they got up to 2 reel pictures, and finally they got up to 5 reel pictures. People would go out and have a cigarette. It was too much. It would hurt the eye. And the same sound would hurt the ear. And it was an artificial sound, and it was awful. They called them the talkies, the squawkies, and all those jokes. And it was very bad.
Mas o primeiro filme inteiramente falado já estava a caminho. Em julho de 28, a Warner lançou As Luzes de Nova York, um filme de gangster medíocre que se arrastava por 57 longos minutos. O New York Times, maravilhado, descreveu o filme como 7 rolos de fala. Já o Variety afirmou que o filme era não só 100% falado, mas 100% chato.
Now what do you want?
Well, I want a lot of things. But most of all, I want you.
Don't you ever get bored looking at me, Eddie?
Well, I get bored looking at anyone else but you. In fact, I don't like anyone looking at you.
You know, I believe you're jealous.
You believe I'm jealous? And why shouldn't I be of the prettiest girl in the world?
Mas, apesar da má qualidade do som, os filmes falados tinham chegado para ficar. Em Hollywood, foi imediata a demanda por atores capazes de falar. Muitas estrelas do cinema mudo não tinham experiência teatral e não sabiam se seriam capazes de gesticular e falar ao mesmo tempo. Naturalmente, ficaram preocupadas. Seriam capazes dessa transição?
Now
wait a second, Mr. Simpson. Talking pictures. I think you should wait.
Every studio is jumping on the bandwagon, Dexter. All the theaters are putting in sound equipment. We don't want to be left out of it.
We don't know anything about this gadget.
What do you have to know? It's a picture. You do what you always did. You just add talking to it.
Yeah?
Don, believe me, it will be a sensation. Lamont and Lockwood, they talk.
Well, of course we talk. Don't everybody?
Buddy Rogers was on
Buddy
location
Rogers
with
estava em
Gary
locação com Gary Cooper e Richard Allen filmando Wings, até então um filme mudo, quando perceberam que seu futuro estava em jogo.
We were told that only one voice out of 1,000 would register for the movies. And we were coming back to Paramount Studio, where we were all under contract, not knowing whether we were going to have a voice or not. And when we arrived back, we saw a sound stage, a new sound stage. This was built specially to find out the group of people under contract, the stars, whether they had a voice or not. And each one would go in every day. And Gary Cooper and I and Dick Arnold, we'd go watch every day, and we watch it see him. One day, they took Wallace Beery in there. And we waited 4 or 5 hours, and all of a sudden the door opened, and a little boy ran out and said, "He has a voice. Wally Beery can talk. Isn't that great?"
People were frightened. Those who had never had stage experience would say, were frightened because they thought, what shall I do? Those of us who had had stage experience thought, at last I can use my voice.
It was that serious that Cooper and Dick Arlen and I and Jack Oakey, he came in our dressing room. We made a pledge, the 4-man pledge, that if one of us didn't have a voice, we'd give 10% of our salary to the others as long as we lived. It was that serious.
Durante algum tempo, enquanto Hollywood produzia filmes mudos, tinha-se a impressão de que Nova York seria a nova capital do cinema. A nova tecnologia, os palcos de som e a gente de dinheiro que controlava os estúdios. Estava tudo lá. E atores com experiência de teatro. Precisavam de atores que soubessem falar e representar ao mesmo tempo. Hollywood revidou, percorrendo a Broadway em busca de novas estrelas. E estrelas em potencial partiram para o oeste, embora nem todas fossem ter sucesso. Mas, de maneira geral, quem fez essa viagem foram as estrelas do futuro: Bette Davis, Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, James Cagney.
A whole group of us came out roughly at the same time. All had professional theater, stage, acting experience, which most of the silent picture people did not have. They were at the mercy of the director, who sat with a megaphone and said, "Now look right, now smile, now look up, now exit."
A telegram came and said, "We'd like to make a movie test of the girl in the act." They raided, so to speak, Broadway for people who were familiar with voice, but they weren't familiar with microphones either. And everybody was quite a lot leery of, where am I going with this? How am I going to do with this? It was a nervous time.
There was concern, anxiety, a great deal of resentment and jealousy of those who came out from the theater who were challenging them and threatening their jobs. There was a great deal of that sort of feeling, and sides were taken, and there was some bitter words exchanged here and there.
A very funny thing happened. The New York actors would come out and look down upon Hollywood. It was somehow, well, you're doing a part, but I hate Hollywood. And the Hollywood actors didn't like the New York actors. There was quite some tension between them. And so the Hollywood actors learned quickly to do better work than they ever did before, because they hated the influx from the New York actor.
Naquela época, Nova York era uma metrópole sofisticada em comparação com Hollywood. Naturalmente, alguns atores da Broadway tiveram dificuldades para se adaptar ao que tinha sido um simples laranjal. Ellen Hayes, por exemplo, já era uma estrela da Broadway quando chegou a Hollywood.
They didn't know who I was from Adam, and I didn't look like a typical film star. So he said, "We don't know what to do with you," says Louis B. Mayer. He said, "I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to make one of those beautiful white satin dresses, and I'll pay for it. I'll have it made in the costume department, and one of those clinging things like Norma Shearer wore in the Free Soul, and we'll see what we can do with it." I said, "Stop right there, Mr. Mayor. Save your money. You're not going to find anything under that dress that'll help you out a bit in my situation." He said, "Well, then, we'll just have to keep you acting every minute you're on the screen." So
E deu certo. Helen Hayes ganhou um Oscar pelo seu primeiro filme, O Pecado de Madelon Claudel.
10 years isn't forever. And when I get out, Rosie, I'll make it up to you. If it takes the rest of my life. Madeline? Just a minute. Does he ask about me, Rosie? Yes. He does? What does he say? Tell me. Oh, he just asked when you're going to bring his little pony and... And he asked where you are. You didn't tell him? No, darling. We said that he's gone to America. Madeline. I'm coming. Don't ever let him know where I am, will you, Rosie? No, dear. And take care of him. And write me all about him whenever you can.
Are we ready? Yes, sir. All right, quiet for rehearsal, please.
Para as estrelas do cinema mudo, o som criou problemas que jamais teriam imaginado. Mas para os atores de teatro, decorar textos era apenas uma parte do seu trabalho.
But all I'd ever done was a high school play or a college play, you know, and it was different. And I'm sorry now as I look back that I didn't go in for coaching and going in for rehearsing and going in more, taking it more serious, like a stage performer.
I came on the set the first day, and there were 4 pages of the script for the first day's work. I was the only one without a script. We started to rehearse, and they said, he knows his lines. 4 pages.
It was rather difficult for me. I couldn't learn it overnight. I had to study. Some of my friends could read it once and memorize it. I couldn't. It took me 2, 3, 4, I won't tell you how many times.
Mas o problema não era só decorar texto, era necessário um novo estilo de representação. Algo mais preciso, mais ágil, mais natural. Esther Houston, que estreou no cinema mudo em 1916 e tornou-se conhecida como a Vênus americana, lembra o que significava representar naqueles dias menos complicados.
Say to me, now remember, Miss Ralston, you can't open your mouth. Because the moment you open your mouth, we cut to a subtitle. Now, say the scene is the man next door has shot himself, and you're distressed, and you show us how you feel about this, but do not open your mouth until you say why, and then we cut to the subtitle. Say, all right, camera, action. You know, all kinds of why, something, but with a talkie. You say the man next door shot himself? I wonder why.
Hollywood demorou a compreender as possibilidades do cinema falado. O que fazer com uma novidade quando se trabalhava com microfones que não saíam do lugar? Compraram peças da Broadway e elas foram simplesmente fotografadas. Isso aconteceu até o dia em que os espectadores começaram a ficar impacientes com a lentidão e com a falta de ação. Dramas de salas de visitas. Assim os filmes ficaram conhecidos, pois todo mundo só conversava e tomava chá. Havia também muito beijamão, embora a maior parte da ação se limitasse a acender cigarros.
Plenty.
For instance,
Oh, I could name plenty.
you've answered me.
Don't be idiotic. There are men in the world who are happily married,
Usually for the 3rd time.
and some people stay married.
The human race has many bad habits which it lacks the courage to break.
In spite of all your epigrams, I still insist that intelligent people are married.
Poor fools. They realize the dangers ahead, but close their eyes and smugly tell each other, it won't happen to us.
Os filmes falados exigiram uma reavaliação, uma abordagem diferente dos dias do cinema mudo, quando eram produzidos juntos e ninguém se preocupava muito com o barulho ao lado.
When I was working with Charlie Chaplin before I had my own company, his set was right next to mine in a very small studio. And he'd be shooting and we'd be talking, or we'd be shooting and he'd be talking. It made no difference.
Stages were wide open. You came and went as you liked into them where the actors were working. And not only the camera made a sound, but they usually had a 3-piece orchestra that would sit there and play sobby melodies to stir emotion in the actor who couldn't otherwise get any.
Noise going on, doors were open, airplanes flying around, and nothing bothered you, you know. And we had a smaller crew in the silent days than we had when sound came in, because with sound it changed everything.
Uma das consequências do som foi a preocupação do ator com a sua voz gravada. O equipamento de gravação era primitivo e também o sistema sonoro da maioria dos cinemas. Por isso, os estúdios apresentaram suas estrelas, até então mudas, com uma certa cautela, incluindo-as em coletâneas como a Hollywood Review de 29 da Metro. No início, as estrelas esnobaram a invenção e talvez tenham agido certo. A carreira de Mary Pickford declinou porque aos 32 anos não tinha mais idade para ser a namoradinha da América, mas ainda ganharia um Oscar pelo filme Coquettes. Ronald Colman passou pela transição com naturalidade. Douglas Fairbanks, o pai, fez vários filmes falados, obrigado pelo contrato, mas não gostava da novidade. Como Chaplin, para que a mímica era a verdadeira arte do cinema, e que jamais emitiu um som até despejar deliberadamente sons desconexos em tempos modernos de 1936.
Hal Roach, who is now 95, coached
Al
two other
Roach, hoje com
comedians
95 anos, treinou dois comediantes, Laurie Hardy, o gordo e o magro, em sua transição para o cinema falado. É difícil imaginar como todos estavam despreparados para a chegada do som. Compreendemos o que aconteceu através da experiência de Roach, o primeiro a dirigir um filme falado na Metro.
The next day we get the rushes. And everybody at the studio packed the projection room because this was the first sound picture. And the first scene went on and it worked all right. But at the end of the scene, somebody said, "That's good." And I was a little annoyed because then the next scene came on. The end of the picture, the same voice came on and said, "That's good" again. And now I'm getting a little mad. Third scene came on, and at the end of the thing, this person said, "That's good," and now I'm really mad. So I jumped out of my seat, I stuck my arm in the air, I said, "Stop the action." And I walked in front of all this group was in there. I said, "I'm directing this picture. I decide what is good and what is not good. Now, who is it every time that a scene is finished is saying, 'That's good'?" And there was a quiet for a few seconds, and finally the girl who was took track of the things says, "I'm sorry, Mr. Roach, but that's you." And I had no idea it was my own voice.
Mas se o som era um problema para os diretores, ele não era menos problemático para os atores. O equipamento era primitivo, limitado e inibidor.
Many microphones were broken immediately. Noah Berry would say when he started his first picture, "Oh," he said, "Hey, wait a minute, Mr. Berry, you're natural." No, he said, "Oh, quiet, please. We hear your voice, the microphone's very sensitive." He broke 3 or 4 microphones.
They'd have a microphone, but it was buried in a little bowl of flowers, or it was behind something that so it couldn't be seen. And to make sure that you were heard, you'd have to sort of do the scene with your voice going into whatever the place was they had it.
Every other word. You've got to talk into the mic.
Well, I can't make love to a bush.
All right, all right. We'll have to think of something else.
Na época, o técnico de som dominava a indústria. Era a pessoa mais importante no set de filmagem.
Oh, he was a magician, yes. Nobody understood what he was up to, so he could get away with all sorts of things. He was, I suppose, like a Merlin. With a lot of or the Wizard of Oz, really, because he'd come up a bit of a faker in some ways, but not in others, because he really did know more than anybody else. Nobody tried to know as much.
The director said, "Are you ready?" "Oh, please, are you ready, sound man?" Well, we'd start a scene and cut. There was a little bird up in the ceiling of the studio. We'd have to cut for that. Then we'd pray that the birds would get out of the studio, and then an airplane would come over. Well, it went on like this. We'd make 30 or 40 tests. The sound man was the boss. "No good for me. NG, take it again."
I can say, because I was a sound man, that a sound man, what is a sound man? He's a jack of all trades. He came from all different fields. Some came from camera, came different parts, editing and this and that. And of course, we felt we were really someone, and we knew a secret, and we'd let no one in on this great secret. And we'd walk around the set, and we'd knock on the walls. They'd build a big, gorgeous set. And the director would hold his breath, and we'd knock on the wall, and we'd clap our hands and listening. I'm glad no one ever asked us what we were listening for, because we didn't know.
What's that? The thunderstorm outside?
It's those pearls, Mr. Simpson.
I am the noblest lady of the court, second only to the queen. Yes, I am the saddest of mortals in frame.
Another industry
Qualquer indústria teria suspendido a produção enquanto resolvia esses novos problemas. Mas a indústria cinematográfica foi em frente, construindo, quando possível, seus estúdios sonoros.
At Paramount, where I started, they had no sound stages, and they stripped the prop department of all the big rugs and miles of carpeting that they had, and they lined the walls of the silent stages.
Some stages we just adapted, and they put felt and nails on the wall, try and drown the sound, but sometimes it didn't work. And it was terrible out of doors. They had to be wary of traffic and airplanes. They'd put up barrage balloons like in the war to keep airplanes away.
We would start shooting at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because that way we'd miss the traffic going by on Melrose Avenue, and it would be quiet. And the shooting day then would start about 5 in the afternoon and would go on about 3 in the morning.
Mas não era só o ruído externo que causava problemas. As câmeras faziam um barulho terrível e acabaram confinadas em grandes caixas.
Everybody quiet, please. All the time in the tropical climb away to do that funny, funny dance. I fell in love with the tropical dove while doing that funny, funny dance.
We were inside of the booth. It was hotter than the devil in there. Oh, yeah, you just sweat beat hell. And especially in the summertime on the stage, you know, with all the lights going and being enclosed in that booth, it was something. 4 people in there. We had 2 cameras. We had an operator and an assistant in there, and on each camera. And the cameraman was standing outside of the booth watching the action.
At first, it was just hell. Physically, I mean, in the sense that there was no air conditioning, of course. They had to use a lot of light. You couldn't have any air coming in. And so you just wilt, you know, after a scene. They'd have to wait and open all the doors and let everybody get a breath of air and cool off a bit. Then you'd lock everything up and do it again.
A música e as danças ganharam muito com a era do som. A Metro, a última a entrar na era do cinema falado em 1929, começou com o musical Broadway Melody, estrelado por Bessie Love. Foi sucesso e conquistou o Oscar de melhor filme. E como poupava os espectadores da terrível dor de cabeça de ouvir muito diálogo, deu início a uma nova moda.
Bring a frown to all Broadway. Not a frown on Broadway. Your troubles there are out of style. A Broadway, always wears a smile. A million lights, they flicker there. A million hearts beat quicker there. Those skies are gray on the great byway. That's the Broadway melody.
They all followed Broadway Melody. Yeah. The basic plot of most of those musicals, and I was involved, they were still doing it when I came, were almost always the same. It was always a rough, tough job of getting to the top. You're going out there a nobody and coming back a star, and all those plots.
Cooking our own food, washing our own clothes and ironing them on mirrors, riding in those smelly day coaches, going ragged all summer and then darn near freezing in the winter. And why? Just to save money enough to get to New York and show our act. Oh, honey, with your looks and my ability, oh, I wouldn't steer you wrong. Oh, now, don't worry. You see that electric sign of the fellow in DVDs? Yeah. Well, right there, they're going to have the Mahoney sisters.
We did a number of Broadway melodies. We did them every year for a while. But the success of the Backstage musical helped a lot because it was made through the fact that they were glamorous. The girls were beautiful. There were dances. There was singing. It was entertainment.
Em Hollywood foi uma verdadeira coqueluche de musicais, alguns em duas tonalidades de cores. Eram, na maioria, cópias de musicais filmados como se estivessem sendo apresentados no palco.
All the little dollies from the follies with the painted cheek.
Em 1929, as estrelas do cinema mudo que tinham sobrevivido à transição estavam fazendo filmes falados. Greta Garbo resistiu sozinha. Seu último filme mudo, O Beijo, foi concluído em 1929. Seu coadjuvante foi Neil Ayres, um jovem ator em seu primeiro papel principal.
Garbo was very fearful, I think, and the company. She was the big star at that time, and MGM was also very concerned about it, so she held off because she had a deep accent, as we all know, and rather a deep, throaty quality to her voice, and I guess they were apprehensive. However, it turned out, ultimately, when she did go into sound, that that's exactly what they wanted to hear. Didn't hurt her a bit.
Give me a whiskey. Ginger ale on the side. And don't be stingy, baby.
Well, shall I serve it in a pail?
I'll let you be down to the ground.
Um crítico descreveu a voz de Garbo como rica, voluptuosa, límpida e incrivelmente gutural, rouca e sonora. Mas outras estrangeiras não tiveram tanta sorte. O alemão Emil Jennings não conseguia falar inglês. E para a húngara Vilma Benck, a gramática inglesa era um mistério. Até mesmo estrelas americanas muitas vezes não se saíram melhor. Dolores Costello garantiu o próprio ostracismo ao ciciar um famoso texto clássico. Já a famosa Norma Talmadge também encerrou a carreira dando um sotaque do Brooklyn ao papel de Madame de Barry. Sua irmã Constance assistiu à cena com apreensão e mandou um telegrama a Norma. Pare enquanto ainda é bonita e agradeça a Deus pelo dinheiro que a mamãe nos deixou. Um ótimo conselho prontamente aceito por Norma. Um conselho que seria seguido pela própria Constance algum tempo depois.
A great many careers were ruined just by sound. Some just were not adaptable, or to the public their voices didn't match the preconceived personality that they had. One of the most tragic, of course, was the story of John Gilbert, who had been in the theater, whose voice was quite adequate. He was a very fine actor, good personality, but he was having a row with Louis B. Mayer of MGM, and they spread the word that audiences were laughing at his voice. I don't believe they did, actually. I think that people went in expecting to laugh and did so.
His voice had a very cultured, I might say almost a British accent. And it was totally unlike what audiences expected from John Gilbert. You know, in the silent pictures where you see a big close-up of a man who seems to be shouting orders, your imagination gives you a strong voice. He had a a voice like David Niven, which was wonderful for David Niven, was wrong for John Gilbert.
There for 2 hours, waiting. I couldn't come before. But you could have sent some word. No, darling, dearest one, what have I done but wait ever since I've known you?
And I'd like to remind you that if I hadn't dealt with you that way, our little secret would not be a secret.
But I don't wish it to be a secret. I love you. I've told you that 100 times this week. I love you.
A verdadeira razão da decadência de John Gilbert é ainda um mistério. Sua voz era mesmo muito aguda? Ou seu hábito de beijar as mulheres dos dedos até os ombros era muito atrevido? Sua filha Leatrice e Douglas Fairbanks acreditam que Louis Mayer destruiu deliberadamente sua carreira, distorcendo o som dos seus filmes falados. Mas por que teria feito isso? Gilbert era a maior estrela da época, mas também uma estrela cara. Bebia muito e criava problemas. Dizem que uma vez bateu em Louis Mayer, um erro fatal para quem trabalhava na Metro. Isto teria acontecido no dia marcado para o seu casamento com Carbo. Quando ela não apareceu e Gilbert ficou aflito, Mayer teria dito: "Que diabo? Vocês já dormiram juntos? Por que casar com ela?" Gilbert, um homem que não permitia que se falasse mal de uma mulher, esbofeteou no ato. O insucesso de seu filme, His Glorious Night, encerrou sua carreira. Em 34, ele ainda realizaria a excelente interpretação de um roteirista bêbado em O Capitão Odeia o Mar, mas sua carreira jamais voltou a ser a mesma.
Hello, Steve. What's it all about? I don't know. But I'm going to find out. Now let's see if he can take it. The winner! Say, Pat, do you mind saying a few words to the folks? Hello, everybody. Well, folks, about turned out just as I expected. A knockout in the first round. Hello, Ma, I'll be right home.
No início, os filmes eram feitos dentro dos estúdios, mas a Fox, a pioneira dos jornais cinematográficos, teve a ousadia de filmar ao ar livre em locação. John Ford afirmaria mais tarde ter feito o primeiro filme em locação, um curta intitulado Barbeiro de Napoleão. Mas o filme que realmente abriu um novo espaço para os diretores de cinema foi um faroeste intitulado No Velho Arizona, dirigido por Raoul Walsh.
For the first time they had outdoor sound effects. They were cooking bacon over a fire. The sizzling bacon, the coffee pot was bubbling and the fire was cracking, and birds chirping and horses galloping, and you heard that for the first time.
Hey, you're Coyote, yo. Tell him you meet the Cisco Kid.
Foi assim que o faroeste em decadência desde a chegada do som reconquistou sua popularidade. Em 31, a RKO produziu um espécime único do gênero intitulado Cimarrón. Cenas como esta ajudaram para que ele fosse o único faroeste premiado com o Oscar de melhor filme. Os avanços técnicos eram rápidos. Em 1930, o sistema de som em disco foi substituído pelo som em filme utilizado até hoje. E o problema da câmera fixa superado pela criatividade dos diretores. Em 29, durante as filmagens de Aplausos, Ruben Mamoulian contratou 6 homens do estilo Arnold Schwarzenegger para carregar a câmera sobre rodízios. William Wyler fez sua câmera deslizar sobre trilhos durante as filmagens do faroeste Heróis do Inferno. Em 31, o sempre inventivo Howard Hughes demonstrou que mesmo em peças filmadas, era possível fazer coisas mais interessantes do que simplesmente acender cigarros. Desenvolveu e patenteou uma roda que dava uma fluidez de movimento jamais sonhada antes na produção do filme Primeira Página.
He wanted us to catch the spirit of the stage play and then enlarge with what we could do with camera, which they certainly did. Because that was one set with all of those reporters, men in it. Every one of those parts were important. And that camera had to be kind of sometimes in the middle, catching around this way, then get over here.
Hey, you stool pigeons! He doesn't know where Williams is. I'm the one that knows.
What do you mean, you know?
Go find out, you heels. You don't think I'm going to tell?
We'll make you. Let her alone. She's goofy. He ain't too goofy to know where Williams is. Forgot to close that door. Oh, no, you ain't getting out of here. Now where is he? Where you hiding?
I ain't gonna squeal. I ain't gonna.
You got it. Tell her we'll shake it out of you. Want to have us call the cops and give you the boot? Come on, wouldn't you? Slap it out of her.
Em 1933, o musical deu um grande salto com Busby Berkeley. Ele transformou seus números em espetáculos cinematográficos e filmou suas coristas de cima e de baixo em desenhos geométricos e cenários nunca vistos. A relação do público com as estrelas se transformou com a chegada do som. Para os fãs, as estrelas do cinema mudo eram como figuras do Olimpo, tratadas quase com referência.
Oh, I think they were regarded with much more a sense of fantasy, that they weren't really quite human. They were semi-godlike.
I remember when I was doing vaudeville or something, they had some of the ladies come backstage to meet me. I was sitting in a chair, and they were passing by me and discussing me as though I couldn't hear, couldn't see. Said, she's got freckles. Yeah, I wonder if her hair is really blonde. You know, and things like that. We weren't real.
They were more illusionary. And you were the king of Baghdad or the queen of the Nile, or things like that. And when sound came, it was an invasion of your personal, because you were making your own sound, and you were saying, it was not a title writer putting in the line saying he has a stomach ache. You were saying it, and you had to make an audience feel, I love or I hate, whatever the emotion. So the star became more dimensional, and he became more dimensional in his personal life. They dug into it more. Up to that time, the stars were ivory towered.
I think people began to think, you know, he reminds me of the boy next door. He talks the way that he does, you know, or something. It was, they were more earthy.
All the bad breaks I ever had happened on a Saturday. Look at this case. I was caught on a Saturday. I was tried on a Saturday. I was convicted on a Saturday. I was sent up to this dump on a Saturday. To make it binding, I was born on a Saturday.
And you met me on a Saturday. What about that?
Yeah, that's right.
Operator, get me a doctor, quick!
Not or I'll break your neck.
What right have you two?
Plenty.
Oh, big boy!
Ah, shut up.
Oh, don't be sore, Nicky. Kiss me.
Get busy.
I tell you, I can't without the proper authority.
I give you the authority.
Who are you?
I'm Nick, the chauffeur.
Oh, no, Mister. Nobody's going to peddle hoots around this part but me.
No, don't pull that rod, Mister. I'm warning you. I got a gun, too.
Yeah, but you dirty little yellow here, you don't get a
please
bullet.
don't. I'm asking you. Please don't. I'm telling you.
Em 1930, 3 anos depois de o cantor de jazz, Hollywood reagia com tanta rapidez à novidade do som que só fazia filmes falados. Podemos afirmar que o cinema falado atingiu sua maioridade naquele ano, quando Milestone dirigiu e Leo Ayres estrelou o primeiro clássico do cinema falado, Nada de Novo no Front, o mais convincente filme anti-guerra realizado até hoje.
I personally have no claim to any kind of credit for All Quiet on the Western Front. I was simply selected, and by luck and by chance, as the director told me a number of times, I happened to get it. It's the first film, and this is important, I think, to think of, that I believe ever showed the effect of war upon the enemy, so-called. It showed that the peoples on the other side had the same values, the same dreams and ideals that we have here. They're really like us.
No tempo do cinema mudo, os filmes não tinham uma nacionalidade específica, mas o advento do som deu a eles uma voz predominantemente americana. O som também trouxe as estrelas para a Terra. Na época dos filmes mudos, habitavam o Olimpo, mesmo quando moravam em apartamentos mobiliados. Agora passavam a ser reconhecidos como seres humanos, que falavam com sotaque do Kansas ou Nova York. Essa identificação, juntamente com a novidade dos filmes falados, permitiu à indústria cinematográfica superar os efeitos mais graves da quebra da Bolsa e da depressão. De qualquer maneira, a revolução sonora transformou Hollywood no centro de uma indústria milionária, onde o poder estava concentrado em alguns estúdios, que decidiam os filmes e as estrelas que deveriam ser inventadas. Para algumas, a chegada súbita da fama e da fortuna não parecia real. Aquilo tudo tinha um ar levemente suspeito. Clark Gable resumiu essa atitude durante um jantar numa noite de 31.
I was in the midst of my meal, and he said, "You alone?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Can I sit with you?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "What do you think of this place?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm staying very low, very quiet, till I see what happens." And he said, "I just got $11,000 for playing a heavy in a Bill Boyd Western. $11,000. No actor is worth that." He said, "I got myself a room at the Castle Argyle, which is a glorified rooming house at the top of Vine Street." He said, "I've got a second-hand Ford, and I'm not buying anything you can't put on the Chief, because this isn't going to last. This isn't going to last."
ZYB 851, Fundação Padre Anchieta, Centro Paulista de Rádio e Televisão Educativas. Fred Astaire é Papai Pernilongo. Matinê, hoje, 4 da tarde. Assista agora Vestibulando.